already saw my face in the previous presentations also. So, yeah, so this is me. I'm not going to introduce myself because I've been on the screen already. And I'm here to talk about the human side of hiring. Now, I work for Indeed, which is a job search engine. So you might think, okay, very techie company, probably very data-driven. So why are they talking about the human side? And it's true that we do use the large sets of data that we have to try to match job seekers and recruiters. And we are going to try to automate some aspects of recruiting and sourcing, screening candidates. But what we found is that really, of all the aspects of a company, definitely HR, by definition, should be the most human affair. So I'll start off by showing a few people that matter to me, because this talk is about human connection, right? These are the people in my life, they're the people I love. And the thing is, as I was building this presentation, I realized after 5 years at Indeed, roughly, and it could have been any other company, a lot of the people that I have the most, the strongest human connection with are actually not on this screen. Usually you think of friends and family, but all the research shows that your coworkers are now probably some of the most important people in terms of human connection. And that makes sense because they're the people we spend the most time with, or at least 78% of us employees, we spend more time with our coworkers than with our friends and family. So this is why we spend a lot of time thinking about, what is human connection, and more specifically, how important it is in the workplace, so in our companies. The symbol I wanted to use to try to make a point here was the eye, right? So our eyes are pretty amazing, organs, because first of all, they're the second most complex organ. I found that out while I was preparing for this talk. The only other organ that's more complex is our brain. And obviously they're here to gather information, right? They gather apparently 90% of the information throughout our lives. So that's about 24 billion images. So it's a pretty nice piece of hardware that we have in our heads here. But the most interesting thing is that actually our eyes are meant to gather this information through the beautiful gift of sight, but they're also here to connect with people, and this is something that we've discovered in the last few decades, the importance of our eyes in establishing contact with other living beings. So not just humans, but actually even animals in some cases. And it's pretty fascinating. When people make eye contact, they start to synchronize the way they blink, and the same parts of their brain start firing up. So basically, you could say they're creating a singular connected system. And it also triggers certain powerful chemical reactions. So oxytocin, for example, it goes through your brain when you make eye contact with someone that you appreciate, someone you love, even with a pet that you love, actually. When you're looking at a pet that you enjoy, oxytocin goes through your brain. And it's no surprise that these eyes have evolved to gather information, but also create these systems. Our eyes, and not coincidentally, our need for social connection is something that has evolved, though, way before we invented work, right? So this is where it gets tricky. This is our story, right? It breaks down like this. It's pretty simple. I like simple charts. And so for roughly 200,000 years, this is humans as we know them today, right? But work is a much more recent thing. It's only 4,000 years old when we settled down and we started farming. Farming obviously required much more complex organization, and we could argue that this is when work was invented, right? Before that, we were hunter-gatherers, so I know I don't sound it, but I was born in central Paris. For me, being a hunter-gatherer sounds like a lot of work, but really it wasn't that bad. Most anthropologists now agree that it only took 4 or 5 hours a day to get all the food you needed for your family. The rest of the day was actually spent in social interactions with the people of your group. And these were pretty loose groups. There was not that many rules, so we started developing these amazing social skills that really set us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom, right? Are these skills actually used properly in our new lifestyle? I'm not so sure. The way our eyes were built to establish that human connection and also see predators on the horizon, try to find food, they're not meant to sit in front of a computer screen all day. I think we all agree on that. I guess the question is, Are our social skills also being taken care of the way they should if you look at evolution, right? We're human animals first, we became workers almost by accident. So we need to design our work environment in a way that actually allows us to use these amazing skills. Now you might say, okay, this is nice for a talk, but is it really valuable within my company? Is there any impact internally? Well, basically, it's a big yes. This is not a good to have, this is a must have. We now have a lot of research that establishes the fact that human connection is directly correlated to how successful companies are. We can look at this in a very simple way. Ask people, do you have a good friend at work, yes or no? And then ask them a lot of questions about the way they feel about their work, and the answers will be massively different depending on what they said about having a good friend. So there's some obvious ones. The obvious ones are, of course, if you have a good friend at work, there's a higher chance you've received positive feedback and compliments in the last week. It also increases massively the chance that you'll want to stay, or you say you'll be in the company in next year. But I think what's kind of fascinating is having a good friend at work also seems to have an impact on things that appear totally uncorrelated. So things that are supposed to be objective, we still get different responses. And my favorite one is people who say they have a best friend at work think they're paid better. Right? So they're 17% more likely to say that they're paid appropriately for this job. And the big astounding number is they're 5 times more likely to say that they're engaged at work. So this is consistent throughout all the studies. I picked another one. I think it's the Association for Accounting Technicians in the UK who asked, what's the number one reason for you to stay in your job? And relationship with colleagues is number 1. Pay was only number 6, right? So we see this everywhere. Why is this the case? Basically, Dr. Brene Brown from the University of Houston, summarizes it this way. Because of what we talked about earlier, we're biologically built now to have human interaction, to be loved, to be connected to other people. And apart from work, forget work for a minute, we've now established that social interactions are actually directly correlated to our health, right? Some people have actually even made this comparison just to give us an idea. A lack of strong social relationships is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's worse than high blood pressure. People who are lonely have more health issues than people who smoke and people with obesity. So it's a massive shift in the way we look at social interactions. Healthy social relationships can have a positive impact on our work because they have a positive impact on our happiness and our health. So what I'm here to argue is that it should be at the heart of every single human resources decision. There's human in HR, right? And yet we tend to forget that because HR now focuses, wow, this is ridiculous, I'm so sorry. This is human. This is human error, right? I'm so sorry about that. So I'm here to argue that basically these human aspects should be at the heart of all the decisions we make when we're involved directly or indirectly in any HR decision, right? I think my phone broke the clicker. There we go. Let's get a little bit specific. What I wanted to do is give you maybe a couple tips, a couple real tips that maybe we can all take back, even if you're not directly involved in HR. You'll see that we're all involved in some way or another in the recruiting process and in the way our companies are perceived from the outside, right? So 4 ideas, specific examples of things we can put in place in our companies to make them more efficient, more human, communities. Number 1, we're going to have to try and build a community where our current employees actually feel happy to work and are connected. This is the tough one, right? Because this is the long-term one, so it goes back to the question we were asking just before. This one, really, you can't fake it. You can't buy it, and then put it in your office next week. So today's candidates are going to optimize for happiness, especially in the Western world, where survival is no longer the main issue when you try to get a job. 8 out of 10 of them would actually say they turn down a job that is paid more if it involves working with people they don't like or in an environment they don't like, right? And the thing is, they have a lot of information they can gather before they even come to your company. The name of the game now is transparency. So the voice of the employee is super loud, and this is why I said we won't be able to cheat. We can't buy this, and look nice from the outside in a day or two. Just on Indeed, we've got 72 million ratings and reviews online now for all of our companies. And just last year, we had 1 billion queries on company pages. So that's how much candidates want to know about companies before they join them. So how do you create this community and connection? Well, in one word, you've got to, one of the most frequent answers, or at least one of the common traits that we find when we look at companies that outperform others. So this is, there was an extensive study by Jim Collins, who writes a lot of business books, like Good to Great. And one of the most frequent, common denominators he found between companies that actually outperformed the average was that they, in their recruitment process, they put a lot more emphasis on character attributes instead of past work experience and hard skills that these people have before they join the company, right? I took this example on purpose because you're looking at someone who is, like a hardcore physician by trade. He built these really techie companies, and he and Elon Musk is, also acknowledging that basically it's probably one of the mistakes he's made earlier on. He was just looking for pure talent and didn't necessarily manage to create internally this sense of community, or at least he wasn't picking people based on their character attributes, right? And the quote I love the most is the founder of Patagonia. So you don't have to read through all of this, but I can summarize it like this, right? Patagonia, they make outdoor equipment, so hiking, fishing. And what he's saying is that he'd rather hire someone who loves the outdoors and loves hiking or climbing or fishing, and have to teach them a little bit more about their work, than hire someone with a great MBA that will never establish a passion for the company. Why? Not just because it'll look good when that person's talking about his company, but he's going to have a harder time fitting into that community, right? So he'd rather choose someone with a background that seems weaker for most employees and puts the trade on character attributes. And then you need to create conditions for people to bond. This is a bit easier. This goes back to what I was saying about ping pong tables and things like that. They help. But to be more specific, there's a few things that work even more. What Dell does, for example, in the US, is that they have 1 week every year that is paid where people go and do community work, volunteering, because they found that's one of the activities that actually creates the strongest long-term bond within a company. Another example, and this is more and more frequent, hackathons. Last year we do this at Indeed also. Get people working for 24 hours on a project that they love. It has to be related to your company, or maybe it doesn't. It's only 24 hours in 1 year, that's fine. It has huge impact on the level of engagement of their employees in the weeks and months after that. Tip number 2, respond to candidates as if they were your most valuable customers. This is an easier fix, I feel, and this is where most of the time we all have a lot of work to do, so it's a shame because it's doable, but we don't do it very well. In most companies, a good candidate is actually worth a lot more than a valuable sales lead. I know that because I sell good candidates, right, for a living, so we try to establish what's an acceptable cost per CV, a cost per hire for your company, and almost all the time, that cost per hire, that acceptable cost per hire, is more expensive than a good lead, right? And yet, we don't seem to treat them the same way at all. When it comes to sales lead, researchers show that the number one thing that determines your chance of closing that is how slowly or how quickly you respond to the lead, right? So I can show it that way, but basically, in transactional sales, calling 5 minutes later, calling after 10 minutes instead of 5, it's going to decrease your chance of closing that lead by 5 times, I believe. Now, I'm not saying we should reply to candidates in 5 or 10 minutes, but I feel most of our organizations could reply at least in 1 day. Now, show of hands, who here thinks that 50% of companies respond within 1 day? 0, okay. Who thinks it's less than 20%? Yeah, a few of you, okay. Who thinks it's less than 10%? Yeah, okay, so you guys get the idea, right? This is not something companies are good at. The data's even worse than what a lot of you imagine. 4% of companies reply within 1 day. This is a worldwide number, right? And there's differences by country. Usually the difference depends on the unemployment rate and how tough it is to hire people, because suddenly when we're having a hard time hiring people, we respond really quickly, which proves we can do it. So the US, for example, that has almost no unemployment at the moment, they actually respond 8% of the time. They respond in 1 day. France, unfortunately, we're not very good at that. We only respond 2% of the time within 1 day. And I think the worst thing is the 59% don't even get a response within a week. That's really bad. And when you ask people that went through an application process, what's the most dehumanizing thing, or at least the thing that undermined the trust that you were about to build with this potential employer? Number 3 is the company recruiters and others you interacted with don't show much interest in you as a person. That's pretty rough. Like that's not really kind. But actually people place not getting a response quickly to an application higher than that, because that's just not being treated as a human. That just shows your company doesn't care. The only thing that's worse is not getting quick responses after you've interviewed and potentially successfully interviewed, right? After a week or longer of an interview, I still don't know what happened. That's the worst thing you can do. When we do that, we shrink our potential talent pool. We won't be getting these people back. They're certainly not going to talk to their friends about our company and want to work for us. And as we've shown earlier, having a good employer brand is now key in getting how transparent the job market has become. 80% of the candidates say they passed on a relevant opening later on if you failed to notify them of the job status. So what do great companies do? Here's an example you can look at. Booking.com has a very clear mapping up front of what's going to happen during this job application process, depending on the role you're applying to. Trello, which I think was on the slide on a slide earlier, builds these great project management tools. They acknowledge that they won't be able to get back to you very quickly, because developers are actually the ones who are going to look at your CV first, right? It's not HR people. So it could take them a while, but at least they have this great automated, they have a bot that sounds really friendly and actually tells you, we did get your application. I promise you will get a response, because it's our policy to reply to everyone. We can't have someone look at it right now, but we can promise you that basically it may take a week or 10 days, but we will assure that a real live human being, not an automated computer zapper program, will review your application carefully, and only after drinking plenty of coffee, getting lots of sleep, and exercise. So they're not the best at responding, but at least they've created expectations, and I think candidates would love this, this little interaction, even though it's not really an interaction with a human. And Nabisco answers to every single CV they get hundreds of thousands. They respond to every single one, whether they were solicited or unsolicited. When you ask them why, they just say, everyone eats cookies, right? I love that answer. Third tip, let recruiters be advocates for talent. There's always this notion that, we shouldn't prepare candidates too much before an interview because you want to see what they really have. That's complete bullshit. All the data shows that as long as, obviously, you give the same chance to every candidate, it's actually worth preparing them very well. First of all, they're going to speak nicely of you. So these are candidates that did not get a job offer, but 8 out of 10 times, they're going to give you a really good grade in terms of the candidate experience they had. And as we saw, this is really key in our world today. But unfortunately, you've got 20% of our candidates who say all they got was a time and a place. So what does great look like? I'm not going to take too much time on this because I think we've already spoken about Google enough. But let's be fair, in terms of HR policy and strategy, Google is top of class. They actually have a great blog on human resources alone, and they do a lot of research. So as you imagine, just like Indeed, they're very data-driven. So they're not just trying things out, and hoping it works. But this is probably the best email you can find for preparing a candidate. You can find this on Business Insider. It was a really good article. It's a 1,100-word email to prepare you. So obviously a lot of it is copy and paste, but that doesn't matter. Just in a few words, describing the role in more detail. Product manager role, that could mean anything. Depending on the company, a product manager means a million different things. Explain to me what it exactly is. Google product managers hiring philosophy. What kind of people they're really looking at. So they go in more detail at the philosophy behind the people they're looking for. A lot of details on the interview process. We saw this earlier. This is the basics. Like, this is something we should absolutely do in every recruiter email we send out. So that makes sense. But this is the one I love, the evaluation criteria. Google tells you before you go into the interview what they're actually looking for. There's no secret there, like you don't need to, basically they're telling you, if you don't talk about user experience in our job interview, you will fail this. Most companies are trying to see, they're waiting for an hour and then it's like, oh, he never mentioned user experience. They'll tell you up front. Sample questions, a few that I'm sure we'd all be very excited to answer. How many queries per second does Gmail get? That's a scary one. And they also tell you what not to expect. You know, you hear a lot about the brain teasers. They actually drop that, and it's interesting, they say they found no correlation at all because they do the data between job teasers and the ability to do your job well. Finally, a bunch of links. Extensive details on where you can prepare. A lot more info you can go and gather. If you're a top candidate and you really want this job, you will go and look for that. So the person who wrote this article summarized it like this: a recruiter's job is to make people fall in love. It's okay if you prepare them. Like, the point is, if they do fall in love, ultimately it's a win for the company, right? Which takes us to our final point. Design your recruiting process to maximize the chance of authentic human connection to happen. You're here to fall in love, now we need to create the conditions for this to happen. A human experience, as we mentioned, starts before you even get in contact with anyone inside the company. So we talked about, company pages, info you can find on Indeed or Glassdoor, all these sites. Great example I found is the Lego group. So you can go and look at their HR page. Lego has this amazing page that tells you so much about their company, just because, again, it has a different tone. The videos they put there are not these beautiful scripted professional videos. They're actually amateur-like. These are things you could find on a YouTube channel where it's normal employees at Lego filming themselves almost and telling people about their jobs. And the amount of views they get on these pages are amazing compared to normal, traditional, about us pages for companies. And then, obviously, you get into the real human aspect of the process. What Zappos does, just to give you an example, is they include social tests. So I don't like calling it a test, but there's a bunch of ways you can actually start trying out the human fit, during an interview. These people are coming in, in person. So they try to get candidates in for, in informal settings, perhaps a meeting or drinks after work, on top of the traditional interview process. And Airbnb, what they do is they actually train their staff, not just recruiters or people in HR or the hiring managers. They train their entire staff on how to behave around candidates and try to give them a great experience. What we do at Indeed, for example, you come in for an interview. Obviously, someone's in charge, so they know you're coming in at the right time, right place. They'll call you up if you're late, just to see if you're not lost, or 5 minutes before. You get a few goodies when you walk in. Maybe you'll never work for Indeed, but at least you got some gifts out of it, so that's nice. And then we show you around the office, because what happens is, first of all, they think, oh, this is nice, I'm not put in a waiting room in a dark corner. But also, they're going to meet a few Indeed employees that are actually working on the spot. And maybe around the coffee machine, the conversation will start for 5 or 10 minutes, and that makes a huge difference, right? So, if I were to summarize, we need to try to build real communities, and that means put the emphasis on the character attributes again, and not just the hard skills. I know that's easier said than done. Respond to candidates as if they were your most important clients. Let recruiters be advocates for talent. It's okay to prepare them and want them to succeed. And maximize the chance of authentic human connection. If we do all that, probably we're going to have happier workplaces, but as we said, it's going to have a huge impact on our society as a whole. Thank you very much.